Last week, Extinction Rebellion, also known as XR, delivered these two demands to the government. We must end all new licenses, approvals and funding for fossil fuel projects as we begin a transition to a fair society centred on reparatory justice for all on Earth. And number two, the UK government must create emergency citizens' assemblies to lead on fair long-term solutions to the most urgent issues of our time. XR set a deadline of 5 p.m. today for the government to respond, and 5 p.m. has come and gone, and there's been no word from those in power. So what now? The deadline was set for the end of a 4-day-long protest called The Big One that brought together over 200 climate activist groups on Friday. Thousands of people from across the country came to London to protest the government's lack of action on climate change. They filled Parliament Square, held pickets outside government departments. The goal has been to build a broad coalition of climate activists, creating an umbrella that could include activists who might have stayed away from direct action. But now that the government has missed its deadline, what's next? I'm joined now by Extinction Rebellion spokesperson Nuala Lam. Let's start with this deadline. There was a deadline for 5 p.m. It's been missed. I don't think anyone in Extinction Rebellion is surprised the government hasn't responded to the ultimatum. But what does happen now? Is the idea that sort of you had a weekend of fluffy actions and now the ultimatum has been missed. Now you start doing the spiky stuff again. You start blocking roads or taking illegal action. Is that what's going to happen next?
I guess the deadline is the start of, like you said, we brought together this coalition of over 200 groups. I think the Met said that there was about 90,000 people there on Saturday. If you look at the membership of those groups, it's collective membership in the tens of millions. So this is when we start planning together. This is when we start working together on what comes next. And so we held a series of people's assemblies for people to get together today and discuss what comes next. And interestingly, people were presented with several pathways, ranging from civil disobedience, disruptive law-breaking action, down to much softer things. And 80% of people said they wanted to engage in civil disobedience. So it does definitely look like there's going to be more of that coming.
So is that potentially what this was about? You get a lot of people in for something softer. It's much more inclusive. Then if it doesn't get the attention that sort of the direct stuff gets, you sort of see if all of those people who turned up to this soft action actually democratically decide they want to get spikier now. Is that how I should interpret what you've just said?
I think that's part of it. And all those people who turned up, 90,000 people, that's a big deal. That's, that hasn't happened in recent history as far as I'm aware. And we had almost blanket ignoring of that fact by the British media. The Guardian only republished something by PA from a newswire. So none of their journalists wrote a single word, despite 90,000 people gathering at the seat of power. So I think that it provides a useful opportunity for everyone who got involved to look at that and say, okay, I really didn't like disruption. Maybe I thought Extinction Rebellion engaged in it because they like it. And sure, some people probably do, but we engage in it primarily because it's effective. That's why we do it. And I think for some of us who've been around since the start of Extinction Rebellion, it was deeply uncomfortable to do something that wasn't disruptive. It was really super uncomfortable to do this fluffy thing and to see the media ignore it, because we do know that's what happens. And yet there's some really useful things that have come out of this. My dad was at the protest. He brought a friend from his village who he'd knocked on his door, when he was out canvassing, never been to a protest before. I heard countless stories like that. So people have made connections. Other NGOs who are much softer have come out onto the streets with us and had a good experience, seen that we keep our word, that we're easy to work with, that we're friendly, that they might enjoy spending time on the ground with us. So many, many useful seeds have been planted, I think, despite it being a bit uncomfortable for some of us.
And I suppose let's talk about the demands. So when it comes to sort of a climate change demand, the big thing is to stop oil and gas, or stop new exploration for oil and gas. I mean, is that the sum total of your demands when it comes to climate change? Because I suppose, you could say there are so many different issues, there are so many different actions that the government needs to take to sort of stop us going towards climate catastrophe, that maybe oil and gas, stopping exploration for that isn't enough. Why have you settled on that as the key climate demand?
It's strategically quite a useful demand because it's pretty inevitable. It's got to happen soon. The International Energy Agency have asked for it. They've said, beyond 2021, there couldn't be any new oil and gas if we were to meet net zero by 2050, which is way too late as it is. So it's useful in that it's inevitable, it's a winnable demand. I think it's also a demand that would show us a real sea change in where things are. So it hurts a lot of the government's mates to do something like that. And that's the sort of thing we never see them do. You know, they'll say all sorts of things, but there's nothing that will ever hurt the bottom line of their friends. And so I think it's another useful demand in that sense. It's where a lot of the environmental space and the climate space are coalescing in terms of movement. So it's a useful one for people to rally around. But yeah, this is like really far ranging. It's going to define the lives of everyone alive on this planet today. It's going to be the defining factor in both of our lives and everyone watching. So it definitely is way beyond new oil and gas for sure.
And let's talk about the second demand as well. I suppose there's a couple of things to say about it. So this idea that we should have a citizens' assembly. I mean, I think some people have often seen it as this sort of extra add-on because XR are a bit anarcho. So the real demands are about climate change. That's what everyone can unite behind. Whether or not you into a citizens' assembly is a bit neither here nor there. I mean, but it's now one of your two key demands. Should we take it that you think this citizens' assembly is as important as the stopping the oil and the gas?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think, we're often seen as solely climate focused, and we are, but the climate crisis is not really a climate issue. It's the kind of ultimate expression of the crisis in our politics and our society. And Citizens' Assembly is really a solution that is very useful in the face of the climate crisis, because these are such hard decisions to make if you're on a 5-year election cycle. Like, who wants to tell people they can't drive an SUV anymore, or whatever it is, that flights are going to get more expensive? No one wants to do that. So they provide a means to give politicians a mandate to make these really tough decisions. But they also provide a way to transform our society. If you put decision making in the hands of ordinary people, when COVID hit, ordinary people organized mutual aid groups. They organized to take care of the elderly. They organized to work together in their communities. Politicians got busy doing dodgy deals on PPE. So that's the qualitative difference between what we're talking about here. But I also want to say, I think our Citizens' Assembly demand has been perceived as kind of naive. And I would say, for me personally, I don't think it's going to be handed to us on a plate by the current government, or probably even a Labour government, depending on the circumstances. But I do think we're headed for a massive political crisis sometime in the next decade. And it's likely to be a crisis that's spurred by food shortages. We import about 50% of our food here in the UK, and it's coming from places that are already worse affected than us, like Egypt and other places in the global south. So in that situation where you have kind of social breakdown, or the political system is kind of rocking at its knees, you really want good pro-social, pro-human ideas lying around, and we think this is one of them.